Hi, I'm Ivy. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of the Mothman legend.
On November 15th, 1966, something 7 feet tall stood near an abandoned munitions bunker in West Virginia and stared into the headlights with glowing red eyes. I have turned this file over in my hands more times than I care to admit, and I still cannot figure out why it chose that exact stretch of road. What did it want from the dark? The dirt tracks around the old West Virginia munitions plant were never meant for midnight drives. Locals called it the TNT area. Concrete, igloo-like bunkers, long since abandoned by the government, sat half-swallowed by weeds and rusted fencing. It was the kind of place where the silence felt heavy, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. Two young couples were driving past those concrete domes late that night. Their headlights swept across the side of the road, catching a shape that defied everything they knew about the valley. It stood roughly 7 feet tall. It was gray, broad-shouldered, and entirely man-shaped, but folded against its back were massive wings. And then there were the eyes. They did not reflect the headlights. They burned from within with a dull, menacing red glow. The driver slammed on the brakes. The creature did not fly away into the canopy. It turned, shifted its weight, and began to run. Imagine the sound of gravel exploding under heavy stride. Imagine looking out your car window and seeing a silhouette keep pace with a speeding vehicle. The driver hit the gas, pushing 60, then 80, then past 100 miles an hour down Route 62. The winged shape stayed right beside them. It did not flap its wings, it simply sprinted, matching every terrifying mile per hour, its red eyes locked straight ahead, completely silent. The car tore into the town limits, leaving the dark behind. The witnesses arrived shaken, their words tumbling over one another at the local sheriff's office. They were young people who knew every contour of those woods. They knew deer, they knew owls, and they knew when something belonged entirely to another category of dread. The police went back out to the TNT area before dawn. They found rusted foundations, overgrown access roads, and nothing else. No giant footprints were cast in the mud. No feathers were left on the asphalt. Just the cold autumn wind hissing through the empty bunkers. Yet the creature had only just introduced itself. Within 48 hours, the local newspaper had given the silent runner a name, borrowing a piece of pop culture from the comic books flooding the corner stores. But the people living near the TNT area did not think of comic books when the sun went down. They thought of heavy footsteps outside their screen doors. They thought of unblinking red lights staring through bedroom windows. A contractor working near the river awoke to a strange hum vibrating through the floorboards. When he stepped onto his porch, something large and gray was crouched near the tree line. It unfurled its wings, folded them back, and simply watched. It never made a sound. It never raised a claw. Its presence alone was enough to curdle the air. More reports rolled in by the end of the week, always at dusk, always near the industrial ruins. Witnesses described a strange paralysis, a feeling of being watched by an intelligence that was entirely indifferent to human fear. By the third night, local teenagers stopped parking down by the river road. The air felt different. The crows went quieter than usual. The newspapers treated it as a curiosity, a 9-day wonder for local gossip. But I have looked at the original police logs. I have read the statements of witnesses who never spoke to reporters again. They did not describe a monster that wanted to attack. They described a messenger, waiting for a message that had not arrived yet. What draws a 7-foot silhouette to a decaying munitions dump on a freezing November night? And why did it run beside a car instead of vanishing into the clouds?
The panic in Point Pleasant did not arrive with a scream. It arrived with locked doors and drawn curtains. When the local paper printed the story, the name stuck like burrs to wool: the Mothman. It sounded like a carnival attraction, something you might pay a quarter to see in a tent behind the fairgrounds. But the people who saw it in the headlights knew there was nothing carnival-like about those glowing red eyes. The sightings continued through the bitter November air. A volunteer firefighter sitting in his truck near the river saw a pair of red coals burning from the roof of an old shed. When he aimed his spotlight toward the roof, the creature stood up, unfolded a massive span of wings, and glided straight up into the gray sky without a single beat of leather against the wind. Think about that for a moment. Something weighing several hundred pounds lifting off vertically in complete silence, leaving only the smell of ozone and damp earth behind. The sheriff's telephone did not stop ringing. Farmers miles outside of town reported missing pets, their dogs found cowering under porches, whimpering at the empty fields, refusing to look toward the horizon. Others woke to find deep, three-toed impressions in the frost near their barns, though the tracks always stopped abruptly in the middle of an open field, as if whatever made them had simply dissolved back into the mist. Skeptics in the bigger cities suggested it was just a misplaced sandhill crane, an oversized bird thrown off course by migration, but I have checked the dimensions. A crane does not stand 7 feet tall, nor does it run alongside a vehicle at highway speeds with human-like agility. The local game wardens knew every creature that lived in those valleys. This was not on any inventory. By late November, the sightings settled into a strange, uneasy rhythm. The creature was no longer chasing cars. It was lingering. It was positioning itself on ridgelines, on top of abandoned coal tipples, and near the edges of the woods, always looking toward the town below. If you ask me, after staring at these faded ink reports for as long as I have, the most unsettling part was never the speed or the wings, it was the patience. Most cryptids are said to burst from the brush, roar, and vanish. This thing simply waited. It watched. It let people look right back at it, as if it were measuring the distance between our world and whatever quiet dark it crawled out of. The believers in Point Pleasant thought it was an omen, a strange guardian sent to warn them of something brewing in the industrial rust. The rationalists thought it was mass hysteria, a trick of headlights and shadows magnified by local folklore. My honest read: hysteria does not leave 4 separate witnesses with the exact same description of unblinking red light, but neither does a simple wild animal. Something crossed the threshold into the TNT area that November, and I do not think it was looking for food. So, tell me, knowing what you were never meant to know about those first cold nights in West Virginia, do you think the Mothman was something waking up from deep underground, or something that had been waiting there all along? Leave your theory below. I read every single word. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss where this trail leads next. Because the day after the last sighting of that first week, a local hunter found a circle of scorched grass near the bunkers where nothing would ever grow again. And what was standing at the center of it? I still haven't told anyone, but I will next time. On November 16, 1966, a deputy sheriff in Mason County looked into a darkened field outside Point Pleasant and watched a 7-foot silhouette unfurl a pair of massive wings without making a single sound. I have stared at the official incident reports for weeks now, and what bothers me isn't just that the sightings multiplied, it's that the people who saw it next
didn't want to talk about it at all. Why do certain local legends spread like wildfire through small-town air while others quietly die in the dark? By the time the ink dried on the first local newspaper reports, the TNT area stopped being just a collection of abandoned concrete igloos and wartime bunkers. It became a magnet. The first wave of new reports rolled in within 48 hours of the Scarrett and Millette couples fleeing down Route 62. At first, the town council tried to laugh it off. People in West Virginia have long memories and active imaginations, especially when the winter mist starts creeping off the Ohio River and wrapping around the rusted skeleton of the ordnance works. But laughter has a short shelf life when the police switchboards start lighting up past midnight. Local farmers, night shift workers, and teenagers parking near the old munitions storage bunkers began coming forward. They didn't know each other. They didn't coordinate their stories with the reporters from the local paper, yet every single one of them brought back the exact same unsettling description. It was roughly man height or taller, broad-shouldered, and completely gray. It possessed no visible head, but its eyes, two blazing, hypnotic discs of crimson red, seemed to anchor themselves directly into the viewer's mind. And there were the wings, folded tight against its back until it moved, then unfurled with a terrifying, heavy span that cast a shadow across headlights. What the official records don't capture is the absolute silence of these encounters. There were no screeches, no heavy footsteps on the gravel, no heavy animal growls echoing through the hollows, just a sudden, suffocating quiet that dropped over the woods right before the shape appeared. The local sheriff's department tried to maintain order, dispatching cruisers down the winding gravel tracks of the TNT zone, but patrol cars have headlights, and headlights have a way of illuminating things that prefer to stay hidden in the dark. By late November, the sightings were no longer restricted to panicked teenagers or superstitious locals. Respectable men, people sworn to uphold the law and report facts with clinical detachment, began filing official notes that didn't fit any known wildlife in the tri-state area. Take the report filed by local law enforcement officers who spent hours patrolling the perimeter of the abandoned igloos. They weren't looking for folklore. They were looking for trespassers, copper wire thieves, or kids stirring up trouble in the restricted zones. Instead, they found themselves staring up at something perched atop a concrete bunker, its red eyes reflecting the beam of a high-powered flashlight with an uncanny luminous intensity. One officer's hand hovered over his service weapon, but he never drew it. Later, in private conversation, he admitted there was no threat of violence, no aggressive charge, and no sudden movement. There was only that staggering, heavy stillness. The creature simply watched them with an intelligence that felt far too deliberate for a stray owl or a displaced herring. The press smelled blood in the water. Within days, wire services picked up the scattered dispatches from Point Pleasant. The sleepy river town found its telephone lines jammed with inquiries from major newspapers across the country. Curiosity seekers, amateur investigators, and early monster hunters packed their bags, driving down narrow two-lane highways to gawk at the munitions bunkers and peer nervously into the tree line. Locals watched the influx with a mixture of resentment and quiet dread. They knew the woods better than the tourists did. They knew that the bunkers were built on land that had a history before the wartime factories ever rose from the soil. Yet for all the noise the outsiders made, the true terror remained anchored in the quiet moments between witnesses and the dark. The reports kept coming. They weren't fading away. every night brought a new phone call, a new set of tracks found frozen in the mud, or a driver slamming on their brakes because something tall and gray was standing right in the middle of the asphalt, refusing to move. And that brings us to the core contradiction that keeps me awake over this file. If these were simply mass hysteria or overactive imaginations fueled by a small-town newspaper headline, why did the descriptions remain so rigidly consistent among people who actively tried to convince themselves they had just seen a large bird? Why did seasoned police officers risk their reputations to corroborate details of a 7-foot shadow with glowing eyes? The trail of reports leads deeper into the winter frost of 1966, past the initial panic and straight into the private homes of families living just outside the town limits. That is where the encounters stopped being brief flashes on a dark road and turned into something much more invasive. What was the creature actually waiting for in the freezing fog of the TNT area? And why did the witnesses who looked into those red eyes feel an overwhelming sense of warning about something they couldn't yet name?
The panic didn't stay confined to the woods. By December, the sightings began drifting closer to residential neighborhoods, pulling the mystery right up to the front porches of Point Pleasant. Consider the account of a local resident living on the northern edge of town, just a few miles from the river. She wasn't out looking for folklore. She was sitting in her living room late at night, the house quiet, the wind rattling the window panes against the chill of the Ohio Valley winter. According to her statement, a low hum seemed to vibrate through the floorboards before the household pets suddenly went rigid. No barking, no frantic scratching at the door, just a total unnatural freeze. When she stepped toward the window to check the yard, she found herself staring directly across the narrow gap of the lawn at a pair of glowing red circles pressed against the glass. They weren't reflections from a passing car, they were set deep within the upper mass of a towering gray silhouette that completely filled the window frame. She didn't scream. She couldn't. She described a sudden, heavy pressure in the room, as if the air itself had been sucked dry of oxygen. The creature didn't break the glass. It didn't rattle the latch. It simply stood there, motionless, staring into the lit room with an intense, unblinking focus that made her feel as though every secret she had ever kept was being laid bare. After a few endless seconds, the red lights drifted upward, blending into the blackness of the eaves, and the ordinary sounds of the night rushed back in all at once. The wind picked up, the dog whined and crawled beneath the sofa. When the local police arrived to take her statement, they found no broken locks, no footprints in the frosty grass beneath the window, and no logical explanation for how something over 7 feet tall could approach and retreat from a second-floor viewing angle without leaving a single trace behind. Yet her report was far from isolated. Across town, similar stories began circulating among families who lived near the abandoned railway lines and the agricultural fields. People woke up in the dead of night with the distinct sensation that they were being watched through their bedroom windows. The consistency of these domestic encounters drove the local investigators to the edge of frustration. Witnesses who had never met one another, living miles apart in entirely different social circles, gave identical accounts of the psychological weight that accompanied the sightings. They spoke of a profound, cold dread that lingered long after the entity had vanished into the mist. It was this psychological impact, this creeping realization that the town was no longer entirely private to the people who lived there, that truly changed the atmosphere of Point Pleasant.
The initial curiosity of the monster hunters and press corps began to curdle into something much heavier. People stopped walking alone down unlit streets after dark. Curtains were drawn tight across every window by 5 o'clock in the evening. Shotguns were cleaned and loaded, placed close to front doors, just in case the gray shadow decided to step out of the fog and test a latch again. And yet, despite the growing tension and the armed patrols wandering the edges of the woods, the creature never crossed the line from unsettling observer to physical aggressor. Not once did a witness report an attack, a torn screen, or a stolen item. The terror was entirely atmospheric, born from the sheer impossibility of its presence and the silent, unyielding stare of those red eyes. If you ask me, having turned these yellowed police logs over in my hands 100 times, the most disturbing part of the documented sightings isn't the creature's strange anatomy or its silent flight. It's the profound indifference it showed toward human authority. Police cruisers, flashlights, armed deputies, and curious crowds were treated the exact same quiet, motionless contemplation. It wasn't hiding from us, it was simply observing us from a vantage point we couldn't quite reach. So tell me, knowing that dozens of independent witnesses, including law enforcement officers, risked their credibility to swear they saw the exact same impossible silhouette in the winter of 1966, do you think the town was reacting to a living, breathing anomaly in the woods, or were they just catching fleeting glimpses of something our minds were never built to comprehend? Leave your theory below. I read every single one, and I'd love to know where you land on the file. Because on December 12th, deep inside a quiet residential garage on the outskirts of town, one local contractor went out to check a strange noise near his workbench and found something waiting in the shadows that made him drop his flashlight and run for his life. What he left behind on that concrete floor, I haven't shown you yet, but I will, next time.
I am Ivy, the story keeper. And while they say nightmares stay in the dark, in Point Pleasant, ours started in broad daylight. Two young couples didn't just see a shadow that night. They outran something impossible, with glowing red eyes staring right into their souls. And when the local police went on record, the terrifying truth became clear. This wasn't a trick of the fog, it was watching us. Weeks passed, the sightings multiplied, and a quiet West Virginia town became the center of a terrifying, silent obsession. Then the whispers stopped. The creature vanished into the winter woods, just as the tension in the town reached a breaking point. In less than a minute, the Silver Bridge snapped, plunging 46 lives into the freezing, dark current of the Ohio River. Was it a cruel coincidence of physics and metal fatigue? Or did something ancient stand on the shore and watch it fall? The bridge is gone, but the shadow remains, and the files of Point Pleasant are never truly closed here, on Ivy's archive.
The air in Point Pleasant changed as the months bled into winter. The sightings that had terrified teenagers on lonely forest roads and drawn curious crowds to the abandoned munitions plant began to fade. People wanted to believe it was over, that the gray winged shadow with burning red eyes had retreated back into the dark corners of the West Virginia woods. But silence in a small town rarely means peace. It usually means something heavier is waiting. December 1967 arrived with a bitter, biting frost. The local newspapers had stopped printing daily updates about the creature, and the highway patrols near the TNT area had returned to routine quiet. For a brief moment, the town felt normal again. Families prepared for the holidays, workers rushed through the bitter cold, and the memory of glowing red eyes in the dark began to feel like a fading bad dream, a collective hallucination born of autumn fog and nervous tension. Then came December 15th. It was a cold, gray Friday afternoon, and traffic on the Silver Bridge was heavier than usual. The bridge linked Point Pleasant across the Ohio River, serving as a vital artery for commuters and holiday shoppers. Vehicles, bumper to bumper, edged slowly forward against the biting wind, completely unaware of the structural strain silently building beneath their tires. No one could have predicted what was about to fracture beneath the weight of ordinary life. Without warning, at roughly 5 o'clock in the evening, the suspension chain on the Ohio side snapped. The failure unleashed a catastrophic chain reaction. In a matter of seconds, a vital span of the Silver Bridge twisted, buckled, and plunged directly into the freezing, ice-choked waters of the Ohio River below. Metal shrieked, vehicles vanished into the dark current, and in less than a minute, a busy rush-hour thoroughfare turned into a mass grave. The disaster claimed 46 lives, shattering the community of Point Pleasant in a way no local legend ever could. Emergency crews rushed to the freezing banks, searching through tangled steel and black water, but the river gave back very little. Families were torn apart overnight, and grief blanketed the town heavier than any winter fog. It remains one of the deadliest bridge collapses in American history, leaving a scar across West Virginia that decades have never fully managed to heal. In the harrowing days following the catastrophe, as the town mourned its dead and investigators desperately searched for answers in the twisted steel, a chilling realization swept through the community. People began to look backward at the strange, silent sightings of the previous 13 months. The creatures, the shadows, the glowing eyes, they hadn't just been random monsters in the dark. To a grieving populace desperate for meaning, the timing formed a haunting, inescapable pattern.
Shockwaves of the disaster settled into a quiet, heavy sorrow. Conversations in local diners and living rooms shifted to a darker hypothesis. The creature known as the Mothman had vanished precisely when the tension reached its peak, vanishing just before the bridge fell. Was it a coincidence of timing, or was there an intelligence behind those glowing red eyes that understood what human engineers had completely missed? Let me be clear about what history actually records, because memory is a fragile thing wrapped in grief. The witnesses who saw the strange entity in 1966 never came forward to claim they were delivering a prophecy. They didn't run through the streets shouting about a collapsing bridge. They were simply terrified by a 7-foot-tall silhouette staring at them in the dark. The connection between the winged apparition and the tragedy of December 15th was forged after the disaster occurred, born from the human need to find a sign in the senselessness of sudden death. Skeptics and historians point out the obvious flaw in linking folklore to structural engineering failure. The Silver Bridge fell because of an eye-bar fracture caused by metal fatigue and decades of heavy traffic loads that its creators never anticipated. Steel does not care about cryptids or omens. It bends, it cracks, and it breaks under physics. Yet logic offers cold comfort to a town that lost nearly 50 of its own in a single minute. And so, the legend evolved into something far more haunting than a simple monster story. The creature stopped being just a strange animal in the woods and transformed into a harbinger, a silent watcher standing at the edge of catastrophe, warning a blind world of what was coming. Whether it was a bizarre bird, mass hysteria, or a genuine omen of disaster, one truth remains entirely untouched by time. Point Pleasant would never look at the river the same way again. The shadow of the bridge and the shadow of the Mothman became permanently fused in the collective memory of West Virginia. But as the winter snows eventually melted and the town tried to rebuild its fractured life, a lingering question remained suspended in the cold air, waiting in the dark. I've turned these old bridge reports over in my head more times than I care to admit, and here is where I land on it. The engineers found their answer in the fractured steel, and the textbooks call it a tragedy of stress and time. But textbooks are written by people who never stood on a dark riverbank while something unseen watched from the tree line. I don't think a winged shadow pulled those pins out of the bridge, but I do think something ancient watched the machinery groan and simply waited for the inevitable. So tell me, knowing the weight of what happened on that river, do you think the sightings were a warning we failed to read, or just a coincidence looking for a ghost? Leave your theory in the comments below. I read every one, and I'd love to know how you untangle it. Make sure you're subscribed too, because the file doesn't close here. What happened to the few who claimed they saw it standing right by the riverbanks just hours before the metal gave way? I still haven't told anyone, but I will next time.
Hi, I'm Ivy, and today we're opening a file that West Virginia has spent 60 years trying to lock back up. You almost caught me rearranging my little collection of missing things, and today we're opening a file that West Virginia has spent 60 years to lock back up. What she found in those woods that night, I still haven't told anyone, but I will next time.
On November 15th, 1966, something 7 feet tall stood near an abandoned munitions plant in West Virginia and chased a car at 100 miles an hour. I've opened this file more times than I can count, and I still don't want to believe the answers people came up with to explain it. I keep these pages locked away because they smell like ozone and dry autumn leaves. People always want an explanation. They want a neat little bow on a terrifying package. But when you spend decades turning over the same handful of reports from Point Pleasant, the neat little answers start to fray at the edges. Scientists looked at the descriptions: 7 feet tall, a wingspan like a cloak, red eyes glowing in the dark like twin embers, and they pointed to the skies. They said it was just a bird out of place, a sandhill crane maybe, standing nearly 4 feet tall with a 6-foot wingspan and a patch of crimson skin around its eyes that could catch the headlights just right. Except a sandhill crane doesn't run alongside a speeding Chevrolet at midnight without flapping its wings. It doesn't stand broad-shouldered and heavy against a concrete wall. Then came the biologists, offering up the barn owl, pale, silent, hunting in the dark with eyes that reflect amber and red when caught in a beam of light. A large barn owl startled in the headlights can look enormous, terrifying, monstrous if your imagination is already stretched thin. But barn owls don't outrun cars, and they don't linger under street lamps with an intelligence that makes a grown man drop his steering wheel in sheer panic. The measurements never quite fit the feathers. The biology always stretches too thin. So the psychologists moved in when the bird theories started to crack. They sat behind clean wooden desks and called it mass hysteria. They talked about collective anxiety in a Cold War winter when everyone in America was waiting for the sky to fall anyway. They said the local newspapers fed the fire, printing headline after headline until the town was practically hallucinating in unison. It sounds tidy, it sounds clean, except the first witnesses didn't read the papers because the papers hadn't printed a single word yet. 2 young couples saw it standing by the old North Power Plant before the town even knew it had a name. Fear isn't contagious until someone tells you what to be afraid of. These people weren't infected by a headline. They were just driving home in the dark. And then there are the ones who look past the biology and the psychology, staring straight into the folklore. The old ones in the valley who remember stories their grandfathers whispered about winged shapes in the timber before the state lines were even drawn. They call it an omen, a shadow that arrives only when something heavy is about to drop. They look at the months leading to December of 1967, and they whisper about a warning that no one knew how to read until the bridge fell. Science wants feathers, psychology wants a nervous crowd, folklore wants a messenger from the dark, but none of them account for the stillness in the woods right after the sightings stopped. The air didn't just go quiet, it went dead. The documents from the Air Force investigators are heavily redacted at the edges. Ink spills over paragraphs like spilled wine. They interviewed the sheriff, they questioned the teenagers, and then they closed the folders and walked away with their hands in their pockets, pretending they hadn't seen the notes scribbled in the margins by men who were genuinely rattled. The skeptics think they've won because the creature hasn't been photographed clearly in decades, but absence of proof is not absence of presence. Sometimes a legend doesn't vanish because it was solved, it vanishes because it finished what it came to do. What happens to a town when the noise finally dies down and the reporters pack up their typewriters? They are left staring at the empty road, wondering if the shadow ever really left the tree line, or if it just learned to blend into the dark.
Don't wander off too far while you're thinking about it. Because the part of the file they didn't want anyone reading, well, I'm looking at it right now.
Look at the maps of Mason County from that winter. The sightings clustered tight around the TNT area, an abandoned wartime depot filled with concrete igloos and chemical runoff. People love to point at the industrial waste and whisper about mutation, but nature doesn't carve a 7-foot silhouette out of toxic sludge just because a government department left their trash behind. The psychological experts want us to believe that fear is a creative architect. They say if you stare into the dark long enough, your own mind will build the monster for you. But the physical evidence left behind on the asphalt didn't come from anyone's imagination. Car tires squealed. Headlights caught something solid. Witnesses threw up from the sheer adrenaline spike of locking eyes with a face that had no business existing. If it was a hoax, someone pulled off the greatest practical joke in American history without a single confession, without a single prop found in a barn, and without a single person slipping up over 50 years of interviews. People boast about their lies eventually. They get old, they get soft, and they want the credit. Nobody has ever stepped forward to claim the wings.
If it was just a displaced bird, why did the local dogs refuse to leave their porches for weeks? Why did the radio interference spike in the exact moments the creature was reported down the road? The physics of the encounters never quite align with a simple case of mistaken identity. And yet, the paranormal theory has its own dead ends. If it was a harbinger, a supernatural shadow sent to stand on the edge of town before tragedy struck, why appear to teenagers driving to a dance months before anything happened? Why waste the warning so early? Why pace back and forth like a caged animal if its only purpose was to deliver a grim postcard from the future? The theories cancel each other out. The biologist disproves the psychologist dismisses the folklorist, and the folklorist laughs at them both for thinking a creature like that cares about human categories. If you ask me, after staring at these faded police reports and typed statements until my eyes ache, I don't think any of the standard boxes fit. The skeptics are too eager to explain away the terror because a world with monsters in it is an inconvenient place to live. But the believers sometimes force a shape onto the dark that doesn't belong there either. The truth usually hides in the cold, unyielding space, right between what science can measure and what fear can exaggerate. So tell me, looking at the wreckage of all these explanations, which one feels more terrifying to you? The idea that a strange bird fooled a panicked town, or the terrifying possibility that something old and nameless simply stepped out of the woods to see what we were becoming? Leave your theory below. I read every single one, and I'm curious which lie you prefer to tell yourself in the dark. Make sure you're subscribed too, because I keep my files close. Because beneath all the scientific papers and the newspaper clippings, there is one report from a farmhouse on the outskirts of Point Pleasant that was never published. A page I found tucked into the back of a completely different case file, dated 3 days after the bridge fell. And the last sentence written on that page, well, I'll show you that part next time.
Hi, my name is Ivy. And for months, I thought the files on Point Pleasant were finally closed. Every tourist leaves with a t-shirt and a smile, but nobody talks about what happens when the festival lights go out and the woods get quiet. Do you think the monster ever really left? Subscribe right now and let me show you what's scratching at my window.
A 12-foot stainless steel statue with glowing red eyes stands guard on 4th Street in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and thousands of tourists line up every September just to touch its metal toes. I've turned the final pages of this file under the amber glow of my reading lamp, and I still can't decide if the monument is meant to ward off the dark or invite it back. When a creature born of terror becomes a t-shirt, a festival mascot, and a roadside attraction, what happens to the dread that birthed it in the winter of 1966? If you walk down Main Street today, the shadow of the red-eyed apparition doesn't hide in the cornfields anymore. It lives on neon signs, coffee mugs, and the glossy covers of paperbacks stacked neatly behind glass display cases. Jeff Wamsley opened the Mothman Museum right there in town, filling small rooms with yellowed newspaper clippings, movie props, and handmade puppets of a winged terror. I remember when those clippings were damp police reports and frantic phone calls to the sheriff. Now they're laminated, they're framed. Tourists buy refrigerator magnets shaped like glowing red eyes while eating pancakes shaped like moth wings. The terror has been neatly packaged, fitted with a gift bow, and sold back to the curious souls who drive hundreds of miles just to say they stood where it happened. Yet, beneath the festival tents and the brass bands of the annual Mothman Festival, the locals know something the souvenir shops can't capture. The laughter of the crowds on a crisp September afternoon feels a bit too loud, like children whistling past a graveyard after dark.
Thousands descend upon the town square for costume contests and guided walks across the river wearing cardboard wings and antennas. They come searching for a thrill, a modern ghost story they can photograph for their screens. But late at night, when the tourists have cleared out and the neon signs flicker off, the steel statue stands alone in the dark, and 4th Street grows remarkably quiet. I sat across from a local shopkeeper last autumn who watched the festival crowds drift away from her shop window. She didn't buy a t-shirt, and she didn't wear the antenna headband. She just told me that every town needs a myth to hold its history together, whether that history is made of light or iron. Point Pleasant wrapped its arms around a tragedy and a mystery and spun them into an identity that refuses to fade. They took the unnameable thing from the TNT area and gave it a face, a festival, and a permanent home in the town square. It is a brilliant magic trick performed by an entire community, turning a nightmare into a tradition. And yet, as I trace my finger over the old photographs from 1966 resting on my desk, I wonder if the creature cares about its bronze likeness. Myths do not need permission to outlive the people who first saw them. When the festival ends and the confetti is swept from the pavement, the bridge is still gone, the river still runs dark and deep beneath the hills, and the woods out by the abandoned igloos remain as silent and heavy as they were 50 years ago. The town built a tourist destination to keep the legend caged in plain sight, but a cage made of gift shops and stainless steel might not be as strong as they think. I've watched the way people look up at those red eyes in the photographs, looking for a sign that it was all just a massive, collective fever dream. But the tourist brochures don't mention the cold drafts that still sweep through the alleys when the river fog rolls in off the Ohio. They don't write about the visitors who go walking down the abandoned munitions roads after dark, hoping for a glimpse of something real, only to find themselves running back to their cars when a twig snaps in the brush. The commercialization tries to tame the dark, but the dark has a stubborn way of ignoring the gift shop hours. The books are written, the documentaries have played on late-night television, and Hollywood has taken its turn molding the wings into cinematic gold. Everyone has an opinion on what stood by the cornfield that night. Some call it an owl, some call it mass hysteria, and others call it a messenger of doom. But the sheer volume of stories only pulls us further into the labyrinth. Every novel and movie adds another layer of myth, burying the actual November night beneath decades of folklore and pop culture gloss. Which brings me back to the question that has haunted every single page of this investigation since the very first whistle blew across the valley. If a legend becomes a tourist attraction, does it lose its power to frighten us, or does it simply hide in the gift bags, waiting for the right moment to unfold its wings? I thought I knew the answer when I opened this file case months ago, but as I look toward the window and watch the shadows stretch across my study, I realize the file isn't closed at all. Something is scratching at the glass.
Let's talk plainly about where this leaves us, because I've read every police log, every eyewitness transcript, and every tourist pamphlet ever printed about Point Pleasant. If you ask me for my honest verdict, after turning the last page of this entire archive, here is where I land. I don't believe for a second that a giant red-eyed bird was born from the chemical runoff of the TNT bunkers, and I don't believe the entire town hallucinated out of sheer collective grief after the tragedy of the Silver Bridge. But I also don't think it was just an oversized sandhill crane playing tricks on frightened teenagers. The skeptics want a clean, tidy explanation, a misidentified great horned owl distorted by headlights and rural paranoia. It is a neat, comforting theory that lets everyone sleep safely at night.
But the skeptics ignore the sheer consistency of the terror in the voices of the people who were there, people who spent decades refusing to embellish their stories because the memory alone still unsettled them. On the other hand, the true believers want every shadow in the Ohio Valley to be a supernatural omen, tying every single unexplained blip to an ancient curse. That, too, feels a bit too convenient, a way to dress up random tragedy in Gothic theater. My read on it is stranger than both camps care to admit. Point Pleasant didn't just witness a monster in the winter of 1966. The town collided with something ancient that was already sleeping in the soil, something that took the shape of their deepest anxieties and gave them wings. The monster was real enough to break the quiet of a West Virginia highway, but it was shaped by the minds of the people who looked up and stared back. And once a town feeds a myth like that with fear, memory, and eventually tourism, it stops belonging to the realm of ordinary biology. It becomes part of the landscape. So tell me, knowing the wreckage, the sightings, the media frenzy, and the bronze statue that now stands in the town square, do you really think the Mothman was ever just a creature of flesh and bone? Or did the people of Point Pleasant accidentally create something permanent out of the dark? Tell me I'm wrong, and leave your theory in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm eager to see if you think the cage of pop culture ever really trapped it. Because as I sit here closing the cover of this final volume, listening to the quiet settling over my study, I am reminded that folklore never truly dies. It simply changes costumes. It swaps out whispered warnings in diner booths for neon signs and festival booths, waiting patiently for someone to wander just a little too far off the paved path. The files on West Virginia are sealed at last, and the festival lights in Point Pleasant have finally gone out for the season. But as I put out my reading candle and listen to the wind rattling the glass against the frame, I can hear a low, rhythmic beating of wings high above the chimney. The file on the Mothman is back on the shelf. But out in the dark woods where the river bends, something is waking up for the night, and I think it's looking for a new town to visit. I'll save a seat for you when the next case lands on the desk. Until then, keep the lights burning.